The flesh hooks always went through the ribcage first. Marcus Threnwood had learned that during his first week as a quartermaster's assistant in the fleshworks, the sound they made when they punctured bone stayed with him longer than the screams. Not that there were many screams in a place where most of the inventory had stopped breathing weeks ago. The hooks bit through dead ribs with a wet crunch. Then the chains would rattle and groan as another body rose through the delivery chute, swinging in the pale green light that pulsed from the plague cauldrons below. His mentor, a walking corpse who still insisted on being called Master Vellum, despite half his face having rotted away, had explained it with the casual efficiency of a man discussing the weather. The rib cage provided the best structural integrity for transportation. Arms came off too easily. Legs were needed intact for certain projects. The pelvis was reserved for specialized constructs. But the rib cage, that sturdy cage of bone, could carry the weight of an entire human body through the vertical shafts that connected the procurement level to the assembly chambers 3 floors down. Marcus stood at his station, a raised platform overlooking the main sorting bay of the Fleshworks northern quarter. The facility sprawled beneath the frozen ground of Icecrown like a vast organism of stone and steel, its chambers carved from bedrock and reinforced with necromantic ice that never melted. This particular section processed what the procurement teams brought in from the recent offensive near the Argent tournament grounds. Fresh battlefield salvage. The quality was good, Master Vellum had noted earlier. Minimal decay. Useful wounds. Strong bones. The air tasted of copper and preservation salts. Industrial necromancy, they called it. The systematic transformation of death into utility. Marcus had been living when they brought him here 6 months ago. A scribe captured during a failed Argent Crusade reconnaissance mission into Icecrown. He remembered the exact moment his life ended, remembered the necromancer's blade opening his throat in the conversion chamber, remembered the cold rushing in to fill the space where his warmth used to be. But the Lich King had use for literate dead. So Marcus rose again, his mind intact but his body changed, and was assigned to the quartermaster's office. Record-keeping, inventory management, quality assessment, the mundane bureaucracy that kept the vast machinery of the Scourge's war effort functioning. Even an army of the dead needed someone to count the bodies. A bell chimed somewhere in the depths below. 3 short bursts followed by 1 long. Shipment incoming. Marcus picked up his ledger, the leather-bound tome where he recorded every piece of salvage that entered his section. The pages were filled with his meticulous handwriting, entry after entry documenting the flow of dead flesh through this place. 237 bodies last week, 193 the week before. The numbers varied with the success of the frontline operations, but the supply never truly stopped. There was always another battle, always another fallen soldier to be harvested. The delivery gate at the far end of the sorting bay groaned open. Rusted hinges screamed in protest as the massive iron portal swung inward, and a wave of Arctic air rushed in from the procurement tunnels beyond. With it came the sound of grinding wheels and the low, wordless moaning of the labor ghouls. They emerged from the darkness in a shuffling line. 12 ghouls, each pushing a wheeled cart constructed from blackened iron and bone. The carts were stacked high with bodies piled like cordwood, limbs jutting at unnatural angles. The procurement team's efficiency had improved lately. These bodies still wore their armor, still clutched weapons in stiffening hands. Killed within the last 36 hours, Marcus estimated. Excellent condition. Master Vellum materialized at his elbow without sound. The senior quartermaster moved like mist when he wanted to, his rotting form somehow graceful despite the advanced decay. His remaining eye, the one that hadn't liquefied and run down his cheek last month, studied the incoming shipment with the critical attention of a jeweler examining gems. "Alliance Knights," he rasped, his voice emerging from a throat that was more whole than tissue. "Good bone density, strong muscle mass. These will fetch premium allocation." His skeletal finger pointed at 3 bodies near the front of the first cart. "Mark those for Master Constructor Felgen." He requested quality specimens for his new abomination prototype. Marcus made the notation in his ledger, his hand steady despite the wrongness of what he was doing. After 6 months, the horror had worn down to routine. That frightened him more than the corpses did. The ease with which he had adapted. the way his mind had categorized the atrocity into manageable tasks. Receive, sort, document, allocate, repeat. The ghouls maneuvered their carts into position beneath the hanging hooks. Another team of workers, these ones skeletal laborers animated with basic necromancy, began the sorting process. They moved with jerking efficiency, grabbing bodies and hauling them to specific areas of the bay based on condition and intended use. Fresh corpses went to the immediate assembly chambers. Partially decayed bodies were directed to the rendering vats, where alchemists would extract useful fluids and preserve the remaining tissue. Severely damaged corpses, those missing significant portions or badly burned, went to the parts bins for component harvesting. Nothing was wasted. The efficiency would have been admirable if it weren't so horrifying. "Quartermaster Threnwood." The voice came from behind him, cold and hard as the ice that encased the walls. Marcus turned to find a necromancer standing at the entrance to his platform, robes the color of congealed blood dragging across the stone floor. The man's face was gaunt, skin stretched tight over prominent bones, and his eyes glowed with that distinctive green fire that marked those who had fully embraced death magic. Marcus didn't recognize him, which meant he was likely from one of the deeper sections. A specialist. "I am Necromancer Valdris," the figure said, his words accompanied by small puffs of frost in the relatively warmer air of the sorting bay. "I have been sent by the Council of Construct Sciences. We require specific components. The list is comprehensive." He extended a scroll, its parchment sealed with black wax. Marcus took it, noting how the necromancer's fingers had started to show the telltale signs of advanced death magic practice. The nails were black, the skin beneath them gray and loose. Give it another year, and Valdris would be more corpse than man, his soul slowly consumed by the very power he wielded. Master Vellum moved closer, his interest piqued. "Specific components?" "A new project," Valdris said, and something that might have been excitement crept into his dead voice. "We are constructing something unprecedented. The usual assembly parameters do not apply. We need parts that meet very particular criteria." Marcus broke the seal and unrolled the scroll. His dead heart, which no longer beat but still somehow felt things, sank as he read the list. 20 spines, intact, from warriors over 6 feet tall. 36 hands, undamaged, showing calluses consistent with swordwork. 14 skulls with fully intact jaw structures. 8 rib cages, complete, showing evidence of magical reinforcement. 47 major leg bones from cavalry soldiers. The list continued for 2 full pages. Each entry was precise, clinical, reducing human beings to components with specifications. Height requirements, muscle development indicators, bone density thresholds. It read like a procurement order for lumber or iron, not for the dismantled pieces of people who had lived, loved, fought, and died. "This will require significant sorting," Master Vellum said, running his bony finger down the list. "Most of what we receive is allocated within hours of arrival. To meet these specifications, we will need to intercept shipments before they reach the assembly chambers." "You have authorization," Valdris said flatly. "Highest priority. The project comes directly from the throne itself." He let that sink in. The throne. The Lich King's personal interest. That changed everything. No one denied a direct order from Arthas. Not if they wanted to keep whatever semblance of existence they still clung to. "We will begin immediately," Marcus heard himself say. His voice sounded hollow in his own ears, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "How long do we have?" 3 weeks, Valdris replied. "The ritual chamber must be prepared. The assembly sequence is calculated. In 21 days, construction begins." He paused, and for just a moment, something almost human flickered across his gaunt face. Not compassion, not remorse, but perhaps a shadow of what those things had been when he was still alive. "What we are building will change the course of the war. It will be glorious." Then he turned and left, his robes whispering across stone like dead leaves. Marcus looked down at the list again. The specifications were brutally precise. Whoever had designed this project knew exactly what they needed. Not just any spine, not just any hand. Specific physical characteristics that would only be found in certain types of soldiers. Elite warriors, Champions. We cannot meet these requirements from normal salvage, Master Vellum said quietly, his remaining eye fixed on Marcus with something that might have been pity if the dead could still feel such things. The procurement teams will need to be informed. They will need to target specific enemy units, strong fighters, experienced soldiers. What he meant was clear. The Scourge would need to specifically hunt and kill people who met these criteria. The murder would be premeditated, calculated, not the chaotic slaughter of battle, but systematic elimination based on a shopping list. Marcus felt something break inside him, some final piece of his humanity cracking under the weight of what he was being asked to facilitate. He had told himself he was just a clerk, just a record keeper, that his role was passive, administrative. He didn't kill anyone, he just counted the dead. But this was different. This was planning the deaths. I will prepare the requisition orders, he heard himself say. His hand was already reaching for a blank procurement form. The motions were automatic now. Fill in the specifications. List the quantities. Note the priority level. Sign his name at the bottom. Marcus Threnwood. Quartermaster. Servant of the Scourge. Murderer. The word echoed in his mind as he wrote, but his hand didn't stop moving. His dead fingers held the quill steady, formed the letters with perfect clarity. Even as his soul screamed, his body obeyed. That was the curse of intelligent undeath. The mind remained aware enough to understand what it had become, but the will was shackled to the Lich King's purpose. He finished the requisition and handed it to Master Vellum. The senior quartermaster examined it with his critical eye, then nodded approvingly. Well done. I will send this to the procurement coordinators immediately. They will adjust tonight's hunting parties accordingly. Tonight. The killing would begin tonight. Marcus returned to his station overlooking the sorting bay. Below, the work continued. Bodies were lifted, examined, categorized. Flesh hooks bit through rib cages with mechanical precision. Chains rattled as corpses descended into the assembly levels. The vast machinery of industrial necromancy ground on, turning death into resource with ruthless efficiency. A young woman's body was being dragged across the floor now. Her blonde hair matted with frozen blood, her armor bearing the sigil of the Argent Crusade. She couldn't have been more than 25 when she died. Marcus found himself wondering who she had been. A daughter? A sister? Had someone loved her? Was someone, somewhere, waiting for her to return home? The skeletal laborers hooked her through the ribcage and sent her down to the assembly chambers. In a few hours, she would be part of an abomination, her limbs stitched to those of strangers, her face lost in a patchwork horror of flesh. Her identity would be erased, reduced to useful components in a walking weapon. And now Marcus was going to ensure that more people like her died, targeted, hunted, killed not in the random chaos of war, but because they possessed the right bone structure, the right muscle density, the right specifications to become parts in some grand project that served the Lich King's will. He opened his ledger and made a new entry. Requisition order 4471. Specialized component procurement. Authorized by Necromancer Valdris. Priority, maximum. Estimated casualties required. 218 people who would die because Marcus Threnwood wrote their death warrant. 218 individuals reduced to a number in a ledger. The quill scratched across parchment, black ink forming neat lines of text that documented the premeditated murder of people whose names he would never know. The bell chimed again. Another shipment incoming. Marcus looked up as the delivery gate groaned open once more. More carts, more bodies, more raw material for the endless appetite of the fleshworks. The sorting bay would process them all with the same mechanical efficiency it had shown for the thousands before them. And tomorrow, there would be more. And the day after that, and the day after that. He used to wonder when it would end, when the supply of corpses would finally run dry. Now he knew better. The supply would never end. There would always be another battle, always another front, always another harvest of the dead. The scourge was eternal, and its appetite was infinite. Master Vellum returned to the platform, his decomposing form settling into the chair beside Marcus's desk with a wet squelch. The requisition has been dispatched. The night procurement teams have been briefed. They are already moving into position near the Alliance forward camps. How long until the first deliveries arrive? 3 hours, perhaps 4. They will target the evening patrol routes first. Experienced soldiers venture out in smaller groups during the night shifts. Easier to isolate, easier to harvest cleanly. Harvest. That was the word they used. Not kill, not murder. Harvest, as if the people were crops to be gathered rather than living beings with thoughts and dreams and futures. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Marcus processed the regular shipments, his hands performing their tasks while his mind spiraled into darker and darker places. He had died 6 months ago, but this felt like a second death. The death of the last shred of his humanity. The final transformation into something monstrous. When the bell finally chimed again, announcing a new arrival, Marcus knew before he looked up what it would be. The procurement teams returning with their targeted kills. Bodies selected not by chance or the fortunes of battle, but by careful hunting. Murder by specification. The gate opened. The carts rolled in. But something was different this time. The ghouls pushing the carts moved with unusual caution, and the bodies stacked on the iron frames weren't the haphazard piles of typical salvage. These corpses were positioned almost reverently, laid out flat instead of thrown together. And they were fresh. So fresh that in the cold air of the fleshworks, steam still rose from the fatal wounds. Marcus forced himself to look at the first body. A man, tall and powerfully built, his armor bearing the marks of an officer in the Alliance military. His throat had been cut with surgical precision, a single strike that severed the major arteries without damaging the spine. The killing blow of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who understood that the body needed to be preserved. Someone who had murdered with care. The requisition had specified warriors over 6 feet tall. This man matched perfectly. More bodies followed. Each one met specific criteria from the list. A cavalry soldier with strong leg bones. A veteran fighter with calloused hands from years of sword work. A battle mage whose skull showed the telltale thickening that came from repeated magical reinforcement. Every single corpse had been selected with purpose. Hunted deliberately. Killed according to plan. Marcus made himself record each one in his ledger. Name unknown. Male. Approximately 6 feet 2 inches. Strong build. Spine intact. Cause of death. Exsanguination via throat wound. Allocated to Construct Project. 4471. His hand shook as he wrote. The tremor was barely visible, just a slight waver in the formation of his letters. But it was there. A final rebellion of his body against what his mind was forcing it to do. Excellent quality, Master Vellum said, moving among the carts with obvious satisfaction. The procurement teams have outdone themselves. These specimens are nearly perfect. He gestured to the skeletal laborers. Priority sorting. All of these go directly to the preservation chambers. Necromancer Valdris's project takes precedence over standard assembly. The bodies were unloaded with exceptional care. No hooks through the ribcage this time. Instead, the laborers carried them on specially prepared stretchers, moving them toward a section of the fleshworks that Marcus had never seen before. A door in the far wall, marked with glowing runes that hurt to look at directly, swung open to reveal a corridor descending deeper into the complex. You will need to accompany these shipments, Master Vellum said, turning to Marcus. Valdris requires detailed documentation at every stage. You will serve as the project's primary recorder. What is the project? Marcus asked, though part of him didn't want to know. What are they building? Master Vellum's lipless mouth stretched into something that might have been a smile. Something unprecedented. They say it will be the greatest construct ever created by the Scourge. Larger than any abomination. More powerful than any flesh giant. A weapon that will break the Alliance's spirit completely. But what is it? You will see soon enough. Come. Valdris is waiting. Marcus followed, his dead legs carrying him toward the rune-marked door. As he passed through, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The preservation chambers beyond were kept at near-freezing conditions to prevent decay. Long tables lined the walls, each one prepared with alchemical solutions and surgical implements. And at the far end of the chamber, illuminated by the pulsing green light of massive plague cauldrons, stood a construction frame unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It was enormous, 30 feet tall at least, possibly more. A skeletal framework of enchanted steel and bone, reinforced with necromantic ice and wrapped in chains that glowed with arcane energy. The basic structure was humanoid, but exaggerated, each limb oversized and terminated in massive clawed hands. The frame was empty now, just the armature waiting to be dressed in flesh. But Marcus could see the attachment points. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Every inch of the construct would be covered in layered muscle and bone, creating something that was more monster than man. Necromancer Valdris stood before it, his arms spread wide as if embracing a lover. Beautiful, is it not? His voice echoed in the vast chamber, carrying a note of genuine awe. We call it the Flesh Titan. When complete, it will stand 40 feet tall and carry the strength of 100 men. Its body will be layered armor of bone and muscle, proof against blade and spell alike. And its mind. He turned to face Marcus, and in his glowing eyes was something that looked almost like madness. Its mind will be unique, not a single soul, but a collective consciousness. We will bind the spirits of all 218 donors into a unified entity. Their skills, their combat experience, their tactical knowledge, all merged into one overwhelming intelligence. It will be a weapon that learns, adapts, and evolves. It will be unstoppable. Marcus stared at the empty frame, horror washing over him in waves. 218 people would die to create this thing. 218 souls would be bound together, their individual identities destroyed, merged into a collective nightmare. They wouldn't find peace in death. They would be trapped, aware, suffering, for as long as the Flesh Titan existed. You understand now, Valdris said softly, why the specifications were so precise, why each component must be perfect. We are not simply building a construct. We are forging a god of war. The first bodies were being brought in now, carried by the skeletal laborers and placed on the preparation tables. Valdris moved among them, examining each corpse with the focused intensity of an artist selecting materials. He pointed to the tall warrior, the one with the severed throat. This one's spine first. It will form the central column. Marcus watched as the necromancer's assistants, other robed figures who materialized from the shadows, began their work. They moved with practiced precision, blades flashing in the green light. The sound of cutting filled the chamber. Flesh parting, bone separating, the wet sounds of disassembly. He was supposed to document this, record every component, track the construction process. His role was to bear witness to the systematic creation of a monstrosity built from murder. But as Marcus opened his ledger, his hand finally refused to move. The quill hung suspended above the page, ink dripping onto the parchment in dark spots. His body, dead and enslaved to the Lich King's will, had obeyed every command until now. But this was too much. Some final shred of his humanity had survived the transformation, and it was screaming in protest. Right, Valdris commanded, noticing Marcus's hesitation. Document what you witness. That is your purpose. Marcus's voice emerged as a croak. I cannot. You are undead. You serve the Lich King. You have no choice. I was a scribe, Marcus whispered, the words forcing themselves out through clenched teeth. A scholar. I recorded knowledge. I preserved information. I never wanted this, never chose this. None of us chose this, Valdris said, and for just a moment, his voice carried something other than cold command. It carried exhaustion. Do you think I wanted to become this? I was a healer once in Dalaran. I saved lives, mended wounds, cured diseases. Then the scourge came, and I died, and I rose, and now I do. This. He gestured to the tables where his assistants were methodically dismembering corpses. I build weapons from the dead. I bind souls into prisons of flesh. I create horrors that will kill hundreds more, who will in turn become material for more constructs. It never ends. It never stops. and I remember every single person I have destroyed in the service of the Lich King's will." "Then why?" Marcus demanded, desperation bleeding into his voice. "Why do it? Why not refuse? Why not resist?" "Because we cannot." Valdris's words were simple, final. "The compulsion is absolute. The best we can do is remember our humanity, even as we're forced to destroy everyone else's." "Right, Quartermaster Threnwood. Document what happens here. Bear witness. It is the only mercy left to us. The only way to ensure that what we do is not forgotten." Marcus looked down at his ledger. Then, with a hand that trembled with the effort of defying instinct, he began to write. Entry 1. Flesh Titan Construction Log. First component. Spine extracted from deceased Alliance officer. Identity unknown. The spine was intact, as specified. The extraction took 7 minutes. I counted each one. The construction continued through the night. Marcus documented everything, his entries growing more detailed as the horror of what he was witnessing demanded to be recorded in full. Not clinical notes, but complete accounts. He wrote the names of the dead when he could learn them, descriptions of who they had been when alive. He noted the expressions frozen on their faces, the calluses on their hands that spoke of their professions, the scars that told stories of battles survived, right up until the final one. By dawn, the central structure of the Flesh Titan was taking shape. A massive spine rose from the frame, each vertebra locked into place with necromantic sorcery. Ribs spread outward like the branches of a dead tree, creating a cage that would support layers of muscle and armor. The skull, selected from a battle mage whose magical reinforcement made the bone nearly unbreakable, crowned the construction. Even incomplete, it was terrible to behold. And Marcus had documented every stage. 3 weeks. That was how long they had. 3 weeks of systematic murder and meticulous construction. 3 weeks of watching human beings be reduced to components and assembled into a walking apocalypse. He closed his ledger as the first rays of morning light filtered through the ventilation shafts high above. The green glow of the plague cauldrons was fading as the necromancers completed the day's work and retreated to whatever chambers they used for rest. Even the undead needed to conserve their strength. Master Vellum appeared at Marcus's side, somehow looking more decayed than he had the night before. "The first day went well. Valdris is pleased with your documentation. You will return tonight for the next phase. And if I refuse, you won't. You can't. The compulsion will bring you back whether you wish it or not." The elder quartermaster placed a skeletal hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Take what rest you can, Threnwood. The work ahead will be long and difficult, and at the end of it, we will have created something truly monstrous." Marcus left the preservation chamber, climbing back up through the levels of the fleshworks to his small quarters near the sorting bay. The room was bare, containing only a cot he didn't sleep in and a desk covered in ledgers. He sat at the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a personal journal he had kept hidden since his transformation. In it, he had been recording his experiences. Not the official documentation of his duties, but his thoughts, his fears, his desperate attempts to hold on to some fragment of his identity. Now he added a new entry, writing quickly before the memory of the night could fade. "I am complicit in murder. Not passive, not innocent. I am actively facilitating the killing of specific people to serve a purpose I find abhorrent. I tell myself I have no choice, that the compulsion removes my agency. But is that true? Or is it simply the excuse that allows me to continue doing what I know is wrong? The Flesh Titan will be completed. I will document every stage of its construction, and when it is unleashed upon the world, the blood of everyone it kills will be on my hands as surely as if I wielded the blade myself. I was a scribe once. Now I am something else. I don't know what word to use. Monster seems too simple. Victim seems too generous. Perhaps there is no word for what I have become. Just another piece of the machine, grinding forward, turning life into death, and death into worse things still. May whatever God still listen forgive me. I cannot forgive myself." He closed the journal and hid it in the drawer again. Then he lay down on the cot, his dead body assuming a position of rest even though he couldn't truly sleep. Instead, he existed in a state of passive awareness, listening to the distant sounds of the fleshworks below, the rattle of chains, The grinding of wheels, the endless sorting and processing of death. In 3 weeks, the Flesh Titan would be complete, and Marcus Threnwood would have documented every stage of its creation, preserving for all eternity a record of how 218 people were murdered and desecrated to create a weapon of unimaginable horror. That was his purpose now. Not to resist, not to rebel, but to remember, to bear witness, to ensure that what happened in the darkness of the Fleshworks was not forgotten, even if no one ever read his words. It was the only humanity he had left. The procurement teams brought in 23 bodies on the second night, 41 on the third. By the end of the first week, Marcus had documented the dismemberment and incorporation of 112 individuals into the growing mass of the Flesh Titan. He knew some of their names now. Captain Helena Brightforge, cavalry officer from Stormwind. Her leg bones formed part of the Titan's left thigh, chosen for their density and the way years of riding had strengthened the femurs beyond normal human capacity. Brother Aldrich Moonwhisper, a priest who had fought with sword as readily as prayer. His hands, scarred from blade work but still steady enough for healing magic, were being incorporated into the Titan's right arm. Valdris said the muscle memory would remain, that the collective consciousness would retain combat instincts from each donor. Sergeant Marcus Ironheart. The name had struck him when he heard it. Another Marcus. A mirror of what he might have been if he'd chosen the soldier's path instead of the scholar's. The sergeant's spine reinforced the lower lumbar section, adding structural support to bear the weight of the upper body. Each night, Marcus returned to the preservation chamber and watched the construction progress. The Flesh Titan grew with terrible beauty. Layer upon layer of muscle and bone woven together with necromantic precision. Valdris and his team worked with the focus of master craftsmen, each movement calculated, each component placed with purpose. The Necromancer had not been wrong about the artistry involved. This was not the crude assembly of typical abominations, which were essentially patchwork monsters stitched together with minimal care. The Flesh Titan was being constructed with the same attention to detail a sculptor might give to marble. Every muscle fiber aligned correctly. Every bone reinforced and locked into position with enchanted steel. Every nerve cluster preserved and connected to the collective network that would give the construct life. By the 10th day, the Titan had arms. Massive limbs ending in hands that could crush stone, each finger tipped with claws fashioned from sharpened bone. The musculature was exposed. Raw red tissue covered in preservation runes that kept it from decay. Marcus counted 47 different individuals whose flesh contributed to those arms alone. On the 13th day, they began work on the legs. This phase required the most bodies, as the Titan needed to support its own enormous weight. The procurement teams intensified their hunts, targeting cavalry units and mountain infantry, soldiers whose legs had been strengthened by years of difficult terrain and heavy loads. Marcus documented each delivery, each name when he could learn it. Each face before it was flensed from the skull. He filled page after page of his ledger with the stories of the dead, preserving what little he could of their identities before they were consumed by the collective. But something was changing in the preservation chamber. As more souls were bound into the Titan's frame, Marcus began to feel a presence. Not physical, not visible, but there, lurking at the edges of perception like a shadow that moved when he wasn't looking directly at it. The collective consciousness was forming. He first noticed it during the incorporation of the 67th body. A young woman, barely 20, who had fought with remarkable skill before being brought down by a coordinated ghoul pack. As Valdris bound her soul into the network, Marcus felt something brush against his mind. A whisper that wasn't quite sound. A touch that wasn't quite sensation. Awareness. The Flesh Titan was beginning to wake. "You feel it too," Valdris said quietly, appearing beside Marcus without warning. The Necromancer's eyes glowed brighter than usual, feverish with something that might have been excitement or might have been fear. "The collective is forming faster than our calculations predicted. The souls are not simply merging. They are communicating." "What does that mean?" "I do not know." Valdris's admission carried unusual weight. "In all the research, in all the theoretical preparations, we anticipated a unified consciousness. What we are creating is something else, something more complex. The souls are retaining fragments of their individual identities while simultaneously forming a greater whole. It should not be possible. Will it be controllable? The necromancer's silence answered more clearly than words could have. That night, Marcus lay in his quarters and felt the presence more strongly. It was like standing near a great furnace, feeling the heat without seeing the flames. The collective consciousness was reaching out, testing the boundaries of its existence, learning what it was and what it was becoming. And it was aware of him. He tried to push the sensation away, to retreat into the void of undead rest, but the presence followed. It knew him, knew his role in its creation, knew that he had documented the murder of everyone who now formed its flesh. Guilt, the consciousness whispered in his mind. Shame, horror. I feel these things because you feel them. You who witnessed every cut, every binding, every soul screaming as it was torn from death's peace and forced into this prison of meat. Marcus sat bolt upright on his cot. Who are you? We are many. We are the 163 bound so far. We are Captain Brightforge, and Brother Moonwhisper, and Sergeant Ironheart, and Private Chen, and Paladin Lightbringer, and all the others whose names you wrote in your book. We are their rage, and their terror, and their desperate need for this to end. I didn't want this, Marcus said to the empty room. I was forced. Were you? The collective interrupted. Or did you simply accept that you were powerless? We know your thoughts, Marcus Threnwood. We feel them because you are here, present at our birth, your guilt bleeding into our consciousness. You tell yourself you have no choice, but you continue to write. You continue to watch. You continue to make it all real with your documentation. What would you have me do? Marcus demanded, his voice rising. I cannot stop this. I cannot free you. I am as much a prisoner as you are. Then bear witness completely, the voice said, and now it carried the weight of over 100 souls speaking in unison. Do not look away. Do not let yourself become numb to what you are recording. Remember every face, every name, every moment of our suffering. And when this is over, when we are unleashed upon the world, remember that too. Remember everything we destroy, everything we kill. Let it break you, Marcus Threnwood, because someone must carry the weight of what has been done here. The presence withdrew, leaving Marcus alone in his quarters with tears he couldn't shed running down his dead cheeks. Ice crystals, frozen at the moment of formation, clinging to skin that no longer produced warmth. The construction continued. More bodies arrived. More souls were bound. The flesh titan grew larger, more terrible, more aware. By the 18th day it had a complete form. 40 feet of muscle and bone and malice standing in its frame like a colossus from ancient nightmares. The head was a horror of exposed skull wrapped in layered muscle, its eye sockets empty voids that somehow still managed to convey sight. The mouth was a cavern of teeth, each one harvested from a different donor and set into the jaw like obscene jewels. Valdris stood before his creation with something approaching worship in his posture. 3 more days, he said to his assembled team. 3 more days and the final bindings will be complete. Then we activate the primary animating ritual and the flesh titan will live. Live seemed like the wrong word for what would happen. This thing would not live. It would exist in a state that mocked life, a fusion of 218 murdered souls forced to coexist in a single body, purpose-built for destruction. Marcus felt the collective's presence constantly now. It was always there, hovering at the edge of his awareness, watching him with the compound attention of hundreds of minds. Sometimes individual voices would emerge from the chorus, a soldier remembering his family, a mage recalling the beauty of dawn over Dalaran, a priest clinging to fragments of prayers that no longer brought comfort, and through it all, rage, building, growing, becoming something that transcended individual anger and merged into a singular, focused hatred. On the 19th day, they brought in the final components. Master craftsman quality bodies, Valdris had specified. Individuals whose physical forms represented the peak of human capability. Olympic-level athletes. Legendary warriors, champions. One body in particular drew Marcus's attention. A paladin, his armor still glowing faintly with residual holy power despite his death. The procurement team had needed 30 ghouls and 3 necromancers to bring him down, and even then he had killed 17 of their number before falling. Lord Gregor Truthseeker, Marcus learned from the identification papers still in the paladin's armor. Former Knight of the Silver Hand. Veteran of a dozen major campaigns. Bearer of commendations for valor that filled an entire scroll. He was supposed to be the final piece, the keystone. His warrior's heart, still infused with traces of holy light, would be placed at the center of the Titan's chest cavity. Valdris believed it would create a focal point for the collective consciousness, giving the Titan a true center of being. Marcus watched as they extracted the paladin's heart. It took 3 hours of careful work, preserving every vessel, every fragment of divine energy that clung to the organ. When it was finally removed, it pulsed with light that seemed wrong in this place of death and darkness. Valdris carried it personally to the Titan, climbing the scaffolding that surrounded the construct until he reached the chest cavity. The cavity was a cathedral of bone, ribs forming Gothic arches around a central chamber where the heart would reside. The necromancer placed the organ carefully, securing it with silver wires and arcane bindings. As the final connection was made, the preservation chamber erupted with light, not the sickly green glow of plague magic. Real light, pure and bright and utterly out of place in the depths of the fleshworks. The flesh titan's empty eye sockets blazed with radiance. Its mouth opened, and a sound emerged that was not quite a scream and not quite a roar, but something that carried the anguish of 218 souls finally given voice. Then the light faded, replaced by something worse. The eye sockets burned now with green fire. Necromantic energy mixed with residual holy power, creating a sickly luminescence that hurt to look at directly. The mouth closed, and when it opened again, words emerged. "We remember." The voice was layered, multiple tones speaking in perfect synchronization. Male and female, young and old, human and dwarf and elf, all blended into a singular thunderous declaration. We remember who we were. We remember how we died. We remember the taste of life and the horror of being torn from it. We remember everything. Valdris stood frozen on the scaffolding, his triumph transforming into uncertainty. The collective should not have speech this soon. The neural pathways. "You bound a paladin's heart into your monstrosity," the Titan interrupted, its massive head turning to focus on the necromancer. "Divine energy and death magic, forced to coexist. It gives us clarity you never intended. We know what we are. We know what you want us to become. You will serve the Lich King," Valdris said, but his voice carried no conviction. "You will obey. Will we?" The Titan's laughter was the sound of 200 people crying simultaneously. "You created something unprecedented, Necromancer. A collective consciousness born from murder, held together by rage, powered by stolen holy light. Did you really think you could control us?" The massive construct began to move, slowly, testing its limbs, learning the capabilities of its terrible body. The chains that secured it to the frame groaned under the stress. Enchanted steel designed to hold 10 times a normal creature's strength began to show stress fractures. "Marcus Threnwood," the Titan said, and its burning gaze fixed on him. "Bearer of witness, recorder of our deaths. We have one gift for you, one final act of mercy for the scribe who remembered our names." The presence in Marcus's mind intensified to unbearable levels. Information flooded into him, not words but pure memory. He saw through 218 pairs of eyes simultaneously, felt 218 deaths, experienced the horror of being bound, conscious, into a collective prison of flesh. And he understood. The Titan was going to break free, not to serve the scourge, not to rampage mindlessly, but to burn, to destroy everything in the fleshworks, to collapse this entire section of the complex and everyone in it. 218 people had died to create the Flesh Titan. It would ensure that their sacrifice served no purpose, that the weapon Valdris had built would never kill anyone. The collective consciousness had chosen annihilation over servitude. "No," Valdris whispered, finally understanding. "No, you cannot." The chains broke. 40 feet of bone and muscle and rage tore free from the frame with a sound like the world ending. The Titan's first movement was to reach down and grab Valdris, its massive hand engulfing the Necromancer completely. There was no time for screaming. Just a wet crunch as the Titan crushed the man who had built it, reducing him to paste in a single squeeze. Then it turned its attention to the preservation chamber itself. The plague cauldrons went first. The Titan drove its fists into the massive containers, shattering enchanted stone and spilling thousands of gallons of plague fluid across the floor. The liquid ate through everything it touched, dissolving stone and metal and flesh with equal ease. Next came the support pillars. The Titan moved with terrible purpose, systematically destroying every structural element that held up the preservation chamber. Each blow sent shock waves through the complex. Each impact drove cracks deeper into the foundations. Marcus ran. His dead legs carried him faster than they had any right to move, driven by survival instinct that persisted even beyond death. Behind him, he could hear the Titan's rampage continuing, feel the entire section of the fleshworks beginning to collapse. He burst through the rune-marked door and into the sorting bay. Master Vellum was there, his remaining eye wide with shock as the entire facility shook around him. "What is happening?" "The Titan is destroying everything," Marcus gasped. "We need to evacuate. Now." But it was already too late. The ceiling of the sorting bay cracked, massive chunks of stone falling like rain. One struck Master Vellum directly, crushing him beneath the tons of rock. Others smashed the sorting tables, the delivery carts, the carefully organized systems that had processed thousands of bodies. Marcus kept running, climbing stairs that crumbled behind him, racing through corridors that collapsed as he passed. The roar of destruction followed him, mixed with the Titan's voice still calling out in its 100-layered tone. "Burn it all, every piece of this horror, let nothing remain." He burst out of the fleshworks through a service entrance, emerging into the frozen wasteland of Ice Crown. Behind him, the ground itself was caving in. The entire northern quarter of the complex, a facility that had processed untold thousands of corpses, was being swallowed by the earth. And standing in the center of the destruction, visible through the massive crater that had opened up, was the Flesh Titan. It burned now. Holy light and plague magic mixing in a reaction that consumed its body from within. The collective consciousness had chosen to die, to take everything down with it, rather than serve as the weapon it had been designed to become. "Remember us, Marcus Threnwood," the Titan's voice called out one final time. "Remember what you witnessed. Remember what was done in this place. Bear that burden until your death and beyond. Let our suffering mean something." Then the light consumed everything. A final explosion that vaporized what remained of the Titan and collapsed the rest of the preservation chamber. The shock wave knocked Marcus off his feet, sent him tumbling across the frozen ground. When he finally stopped rolling and looked back, there was nothing left. Just a massive crater, still smoking, still collapsing inward on itself. The Fleshworks' northern quarter was gone. Everyone who had worked there was dead or buried under thousands of tons of stone. And Marcus was alive. Still undead, still cursed, but alive. He picked himself up slowly, his body battered but functional. His ledger was still clutched in one hand, somehow having survived the destruction. He opened it with trembling fingers, looking at the pages filled with his careful documentation. 218 names, 218 stories. 218 people whose deaths he had recorded in meticulous detail. They had asked him to remember, to bear witness, to carry the weight of what had been done in that place. Very well, he would do exactly that. Marcus began walking, leaving the ruins of the Fleshworks behind. He didn't know where he was going. The compulsion to serve the Scourge still existed, but the chain of command that had directed his actions was buried under the rubble. For the first time since his death, he was free to choose his own path. He would walk to the edge of Scourge territory, cross into the lands of the living if he could. Find someone who would listen, someone who would read his ledger and understand what had happened in the darkness beneath Ice Crown. The world needed to know about places like the Fleshworks. about the systematic transformation of death into weapons, about the souls bound and tortured in service of the Lich King's will. Someone had to bear witness to the horror, had to preserve the truth so it wouldn't be forgotten when the war finally ended. 218 people had died to create the Flesh Titan. Their collective consciousness had chosen annihilation over servitude, had destroyed itself and everything around it rather than become a tool of murder. Their sacrifice would not be meaningless. Marcus Threnwood, quartermaster and scribe, undead recorder of atrocities, would make sure of that. He walked through the snow, his ledger pressed against his chest, the names of the dead burning in his mind like brands. Behind him, smoke still rose from the ruins. Ahead of him lay uncertainty, danger, and the slim hope that bearing witness might somehow balance the scales of his complicity. The Titan's final words echoed in his memory. Let our suffering mean something. He would try. By every god living and dead, he would try. The snow continued falling as Marcus disappeared into the frozen wasteland, a solitary figure carrying the weight of 218 souls and the documentation of their destruction. The Fleshworks would be rebuilt, he knew. Other facilities would continue the work. The machinery of death would grind on. But this particular story, this specific horror, would be preserved, remembered, borne forward by a dead man who had finally found purpose in his cursed existence. To remember, to witness, to ensure that those who died in the darkness were not forgotten. That was Marcus Threnwood's burden now, and he would carry it to whatever end awaited him beyond the borders of the Scourge's domain. The ledger contained 218 names. He would honor every single one.